Yo, what's good, you guys? It's Boomer and Jared watching Bali Star. Today, we's getting into interesting maps you maybe haven't seen. Okay, sounds interesting. Let's get straight on into it. Let's go. BBL Tracy! General knowledge.
Maps. We all love them, at least I do. In the maps in this video, we essentially get to see information about the world, whether it's in current times or back in history, representing some event or some characteristic of our countries. The fact that the data is displayed on the map allows us to distinguish between regions and or countries, which I think makes it really interesting to look at. So here are a few interesting maps you might not have yet seen. First, the map of the Treaty of Tordesillas. This map divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the Portuguese Empire and the Crown of Castile, so pretty much Spain. Portugal would have the east and Spain would have the west. It was signed in 1494, and the first line in purple divided the Americas, leaving only a small part of Brazil for Portugal. The second line in green was added in 1529 to allow the Spanish to colonize part of the East Indies as well. The treaty existed because after Columbus discovered lands for Castile, he met with the Portuguese king first. The Portuguese were upset and threatened to occupy these lands, which he said were rightfully his. At the time, Castile couldn't match the strength of the Portuguese navy, and so they agreed on a diplomatic solution. Pope Alexander VI formalized the separation of lands with this map. The treaty was eventually replaced with later ones, and other powers like England, the Netherlands, and France never really accepted or recognized this exclusive division. Next, keeping with the colonial theme, European influence. In this map, we can see how Europe has stretched out its power and influence throughout the world, at least back in history. The biggest evidence of this is in fact the colonial period from the 16th to about the 20th century. Pretty much all of the world was at one point or another under European influence, with a vast majority of it having actually been colonized or fully controlled. Others, like China or Turkey, had very heavy influence by European powers in terms of investment and trade, and China even had some of its actual territory colonized.
I thought Russia was part of Asia.
As well, like Hong Kong, Macau, and other regions ceded to France and Germany. It's also interesting to see how some current countries fully adopted the European state model, if you will. I feel like the ones in America are the best example of that, as well as Australia and New Zealand, while others gained or regained their independence and kept their local indigenous customs, like India or some African countries. Only a few countries like Japan or Korea have never been colonized by Europe, although influence is something which is hard to measure, so I guess arguably we could say they were influenced as well at one point or another. In this next one, we see the most
Ethiopia was never
sports
colonized by
in the
Europe.
world by country.
They maintained
Sorry
their
that
own
the resolution isn't great on some of these.
culture.
Football, the most popular sport in the world for sure. Some say it was invented in England, some in China. Whatever the case, it is unquestionable that today football is the world's most popular sport and also the most famous one. The US's
That's
version
facts.
of football, American football, is the most popular sport only in the US. The NFL Super Bowl has about 100 million viewers, while the Champions League final reaches 118 million, and the World Cup in total projects even way more than that. Canada and Sweden have ice hockey as number one, and some Central South American countries prefer baseball, like Cuba or Venezuela, and
Really?
in Asia, Japan has it as well. In
I
India,
thought they'd be more into
Pakistan,
cricket.
Australia, and Bangladesh, cricket comes at the top of the list, perhaps due to British influence. And then we have some other exceptions, like Gaelic football in Ireland, basketball in Estonia and Lithuania, and wrestling in Mongolia. China also comes in with a different choice of table tennis.
Ping
Next, we
pong.
can take a look at how the world would look with today's borders if Pangea was still a reality. It's pretty crazy to see Brazil bordering Nigeria, or the US bordering Mauritania, Portugal and France next to Canada, and India side by side with Madagascar and Antarctica. Plus, shortcuts like the Panama or the Suez canals would be pointless. A single gigantic ocean would surround us
It's
all. And to
Pangea.
go from Greece to Argentina, you would have to literally go around the entire world. As a fifth map, here are the countries in the world which officially don't use the metric system. Until recently, only 3 countries had not adopted the International System of Units, also known as the metric system: Burma, Liberia, and the US. However, despite not using them officially, some use it in certain aspects, like the US with their military in order to ensure interoperability with allied forces, particularly with NATO. In the meantime, both Burma and Liberia have said to have been taking steps to fully implement the metric system as their definitive measuring system, and I believe currently they have at least a dual unit system. And even the US, they use the metric system more than we realize. They use kilometers for their races, a 5K race or a 100-meter dash. Their bottles use liters, their medicine uses milligrams. In fact, in 1975, President Gerald Ford signed it into law, declaring the metric system the preferred system of weights and measures for the United States trade and commerce. But I guess it just didn't have much success in fully being implemented with the whole of the population. Now we move to how the world would look if mapping conventions were upside down. The fact that we have associated north with up on a map is, from what I know, somewhat arbitrary. So, what would the world look like if for some reason we had decided otherwise, that south was up? It's weird how this would lead us, at least for me, to look at the world in a completely different way. Not only because
Right?
it's upside down, but you see connections between countries or paths between continents more easily. For instance, the Mediterranean seems much closer to India because our focus isn't taken away by Africa as much. And I know it doesn't make much sense, but the world looks smaller to me with a map like this.
Kind of does.
Someone's smelling fresh. Did she take my Old Spice total body deodorant with 24?
Next, friendliness. In this map, we can see the attitude towards visitors. Now, obviously, these things are highly subjective, and what one person perceives as welcoming, another might not. We also need to take into account that someone from Spain might find Russians unwelcoming, while someone from Kazakhstan might find them welcoming. Different locations have different customs. However, we can look into this as an indicator of what the majority of people think of countries in the world according to their attitude towards visitors. Canada, Ireland, Belgium, Austria, Iceland, New Zealand, and Portugal are amongst the most welcoming, while Iran, Saudi Arabia, Bolivia, Russia, China, and Mongolia are on the opposite end. It's interesting to see that either on the top or the bottom results, the countries aren't all of the same types of culture, leading us to believe that their differences are more of local customs than anything else. And what may sometimes be interpreted as being rude or unfriendly to visitors might not really mean that for local people. Keeping with a country ranking type of map, safety. The Global Peace Index measures the national peacefulness in each country. Curiously, a lot of the countries who are most welcoming.
Yeah, in Canada, like, motherfuckers leave their front door open. They don't even lock their front doors, bro. Or at least that was like back in the day. I think they do now, but I don't know. I'm not sure. They probably they possibly still don't lock their front doors.
To foreigners are also the safest.
That's what I heard
the
a
top
long time
five
ago.
include Iceland, New Zealand, Austria, Portugal, and Denmark, while the 5 least safe are Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Iraq, and Somalia. The GPI measures global peace using 3 criteria: the level of safety and security in society, the extent of ongoing domestic and international conflict, and the degree of militarization. In general terms, the world has become a full 2.14% less safe in the past decade, with growing inequality between the safest and the less safe countries. Next, China. This is a map of the Haiye Tingshong line, which shows us the concentration of the Chinese population on the eastern coastal part of their territory. On the right side of this line, 94% of the Chinese people live and work. The western side has 57% of the area, but only 6% of the population. And there are a few reasons for this such uneven distribution. One of them is terrain. Part of the interior has mountains, which makes it hard for transportation, agriculture, and even industry to develop. This leads to less jobs being available in those regions. Some of the interior also has somewhat inhospitable climate, leading the people to the coast. And finally, most countries we know have one capital. At most, sometimes the most well-known or biggest city isn't the actual capital, but there are a few countries in the world which have two capitals. Chile is an example, with Santiago as the official capital and Valparaiso as the seat of the national legislature. Netherlands has its constitutional capital in Amsterdam and its seat of government in The Hague. South Africa has three capitals, Pretoria as the executive, Cape Town as legislative, and Bloemfontein as the judicial one. And to wrap things up, we have a map showing us which states in the US you can legally own a kangaroo. Apparently, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and South Carolina allow you to just freely buy kangaroos. Cool. So those are...
I watched this one YouTuber who has like a pet kangaroo. He does a whole ranching, he does animal content where he ranches all these different animals, and he ranches kangaroos. And he said that people use kangaroos as like, hunting game, almost like a fox in British countries, in Great Britain. British countries? Great Britain is a country. So, yeah, they would hunt down kangaroos like British folk with bloodhounds hunting foxes, In Texas they would hunt kangaroos, use them as game. Like that sounded crazy to me when I heard it. I was like, what? For real?
Few interesting maps that you might not know, and that might change the way that you look at the world. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe if you want to catch...
Alright, you guys, so that was interesting maps you maybe haven't seen. This was definitely interesting. Y'all let me know your thoughts about this down in the comment section down below, man. Y'all know it's Boomer. You're watching Bali Star. Make sure to leave a like, support the video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new. I'm going to catch y'all in the next one while hunting. Oh!
Yeah.